Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you happen to be in the world. We are thrilled that you chose to join us again for Connecting the Dots with Dr. Food, David Hughes, the fastest 15 minutes in food, and welcome to 2025. We're back for another year. Now, at CFI, we help members build and protect their most valuable asset, which is consumer trust. We tap into our expert network to help do that work, and experts like David Hughes. He's based in Wales, but he's traveled the globe for decades and has experience in food and drink industry. David, how many countries did you travel just last year?
Oh, about 14.
Just last
Uh,
year.
yes, and I've got Portugal next week.
Portugal next week. Well, that'll be warmer, hopefully,
Yes, yes, it
than
will.
where either of us are. So great. All right. If you have questions or comments that you would like to have David Hughes address, please drop them in the chat box in the lower part of your toolbar. We would be happy to get to those as time allows. So we've got a number of topics today, including the state of the economy in UK, the latest EU trade negotiations, and how different cultures approach lunch, which is fascinating. But first, it's a new year, and issues from 2024 are still lingering. David, what's the mood in the UK?
Right. Well, I mean, bit like the temperature at the moment, Charlie. It's chilly, and actually, particularly in the UK agri-food industry, there's a very somber mood. And what's that all about? Actually, I mentioned last year we new Labour government in the UK, and they brought in their first budget. It was a big budget, which involves taking 60 billion US dollars worth of taxes from us to fill a big black hole, as they say, left by the previous government. And actually, they're not taking taxes from consumers, they're taking taxes from those in industry, and particularly those in the agri-food industry. And specifically, actually, the areas are principally it's national insurance. So they've increased that. That's the tax they put on employers so that the government can pay pensions and also our National Health Service. And that's big. Secondly, inheritance tax, particularly on farmers who in history didn't have to pay this, but now as you move your asset, the farm, from generation to generation, you're going to be taxed unless you do something special before. And then thirdly, it's the minimum wage rate has gone up, and that's gone up to about where you are, about 15 to $16 per hour. And I mean, actually, we feel as a family here. Personally, I can feel the pain. My son has got a food service business. He's got a restaurant, a cafe, a fish and chip shop, a pub, and a small hotel. He employs 40 people. That's going to cost him an extra $125,000 in taxes this coming
Wow.
year. And so what he has to do is, can he claw that back from? Can he raise prices? And he thinks not. No, it's a tough old deal. And so, particularly in food service, where there's such high employment numbers, they're feeling this really badly, and they're under pressure anyway. And so that's in that area. But the backcloth is that our inflation rate has come down, like yours. It's at the same level, about 2.7, I think it is. But inflation is really sticky in the UK. And looking at 25, the expectation is that food price inflation is going to be about 5%.
Hmm.
Energy prices, which are sensitive to consumers here for heating the home, for transport, etc., they're sort of capped by government, but they're going up 10%. And also mortgage rates, which we hoped would just come down reasonable during 2025. Because of the inflation rate being sticky, it looks like it's just going to take longer for them to come down. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is, if we had a cost of living crisis in 2024, well, we still do, and consumers really do feel it. And that's reflected in a grocery market, which is really discount driven in the UK. We've got the Aldis and the Lidls, the big German hard discounters who are just holding the torch to the other major retailers. And then, as I mentioned, there's a reluctance to eat out, particularly in middle order restaurants with your family because of pressure on your income. So it's tough. I'd like to start off with a great big beam on my face, but no, it's really tough in agri-food.
Well, and it's fascinating that the government has chosen, that sector because, as you noted, food and energy are places where consumers are particularly sensitive because they feel that every day. So it's fascinating that they've chosen that because it's certainly going to, I think, result in some kind of backlash at some point in time.
Well, and that's happening now. The farmers are outraged. Actually, this week is the week, it's always the second week of the year where there are two big farmer type conferences in Oxford, which have been running for the better part of 100 years. And there'll be 2,000 farmers in the relatively small city of Oxford, and they're all angry, I can assure you.
Yep. So we're in the midst of an administration change here in the United States. You might have heard something about that. And there's lots of discussion about trade protections, tariffs, et cetera. Meanwhile, the EU seems to be going the opposite direction. So what in the world is going on when it relates to trade?
Right. Okay. And again, there's a strong agri-food element here, and it's in the EU. Remember, we exited, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But EU farmers, the 27 countries that make up the European Union, the farmers are incandescent over a trade deal which has just been struck by the EU umbrella government with the South American Mercosur countries. As I'm sure you know, that's Brazil. They're the big players. Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and they're huge by our standards, huge exporters of red meat, beef in particular, feed grains, and EU farmers see this as they're threatened because it could affect their prices back at home. I mean, of course, the EU say, look, it's so unfair. We don't want the competition anyway, but it's unfair because they're producing at lower levels. Now, I mean, a lot of that is just farmer politics. Right. The time I spend in Argentina, I don't see bad farmers there. I see very good farmers. But now, whether it comes off is another matter, though, because it has to be approved by the EU countries. And France are very, very strongly opposed to this, as you might expect. The agricultural lobby is huge in France. But France can't just scotch the overall treaty by itself. It needs support from other countries. In fact, it needs support from the big countries, because under the EU arrangements, three countries have to disagree with a new trade agreement, and those three countries must be at least 30% of the total population of the EU. So, it'd be iffy about whether this happens, but it could well. They'll probably have to get Italy and Germany signing up with them, and Germany probably is all for the trade deal because of non-agricultural and food items, which gives them an export opportunity in South America.
Sure. Quick, we got a question that did come in, David. The whole Arla and Boyar conflict. What could have been done in your world and from your view, and I've got a perspective on this as well, to have prevented that from happening?
Oh.
I'll jump in while you're giving it some thought. So frequently we'll engage with people who are introducing technology in agriculture and don't oftentimes consider the consumer perspective, right? If I can sell this to farmers, that's as far as I need to go. Now, knowing the companies that are involved in this, I doubt that's the case, but clearly understanding that something that goes into an animal or a plant that ultimately becomes food has to have an element of consumer acceptance. And if you don't work on the consumer acceptance as you're introducing the product to the rest of the supply chain, then you run the risk of seeing what happened here. The other challenge that we've seen, and we'll talk about this more in the coming year, is it's choose your own adventure in terms of what is true today. And so people are much less interested in facts and science and much more interested in aligning their perspective and worldview with others who think like them. And so that too creates a challenge. We've got some new research on that we'll be sharing in the coming months, but it's really about understanding the consumer acceptance has to be part of your market introduction strategy if you're introducing any kind of technology in agriculture that ultimately ends up in a food product.
And that's absolutely bang on. As you were talking, Charlie, I was thinking back to the introduction by Monsanto of Roundup Ready. Right. I remember at that time I was Sainsbury Professor of Food Business in the University of London. And when I talked to Sainsbury and said, what was your response when you saw that they were coming with GM beans, etc.? And they said, oh, it's not a consumer issue. And I said, it is a consumer issue. Yeah, anything we put in our mouths in the end. And in fact, the research I see at this end is increasingly consumers are worried about new technology. We need new technology in ag and food. It's going to be essential. But if we don't communicate what we're doing, then you will get in trouble. And then it takes a long time to get out. We're still trying to get out of
Yeah.
the anti-GM in
Yeah,
the UK
the
and
GMO
Europe
cloud
today.
continues to hover over all new ag tech, and it's something that we have to continue to overcome. Okay, last
And
topic today. Go ahead.
oh, hang on.
Yep.
But don't forget too that so we've left the EU. Remember, so we're not.
Hmm.
It doesn't affect us the trade policy change there. But I was just looking at some survey work there that UK food exports to the EU have decreased by $4 billion per year for the last 3 years. And that's since we Brexited. And why is that? Well, you won't be surprised to know that the just increased border checks have just make it very difficult. It's much less smoother to move food
Yeah.
and food products between, notwithstanding that we've been doing it for years and that our standards haven't changed radically. But now both sides are making it really difficult for each other. And that's just bringing additional costs, and consumers are getting very peevish about all this. Particularly, we import such a lot of food in out of season for us, like you do from Mexico for fruit and
Hmm.
veg. And that we've seen empty shelves, and also, the better part of 60% of UK exports of food go to the EU, and they're the ones that are suffering. No, it's a tough old time.
Yep. Well, anytime you increase friction in the supply chain, you're going to increase cost because
Yes.
somebody's going to have to pay for that additional process, whatever that process happens to be. Okay, last topic today, food culture, particularly focused on lunch. We had a conversation about this earlier. I think it's fascinating. So, welcome your take on this.
Right. Okay. And so look, the fact of the matter is in the UK, rather like the US, I would suggest that more people are drinking their lunch, and it's non-alcoholic. They're drinking their lunch, and this is expected to increase. We've got a product in the UK called Huel, Huel, which has had phenomenal success over the last year. And it seems to be just the whole idea of drinking your lunch is just becoming mainstream. And of course, as in the US, it's driven by busy lifestyles. It's perceived as being healthier, so it's weight management issues here. And also, when push comes to shove, drinking a lunch can just be lower cost than eating a lunch. But if I look at how do we in Britain spend, what sort of time do we invest, if you will, in eating lunch? It's about 10 minutes. If you're eating a sandwich, it's
Hmm.
less. If you're having a liquid lunch, it's even less than that. And so I bet that's the same in the USA. But if I look across Europe, not so in, guess where, Italy. In Italy, lunches to this day are 1 hour. And Italy, and whenever I'm in Italy, it doesn't matter how desperate we are for time, we will stop for lunch, and it will be, in their mind's eye, a proper lunch. So Italians have a different view of eating. Food is about community, tradition. They want food with identity. They value provenance. Well, fine. They've got plenty of time, perhaps. Well, no, 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 no. What's the impact here? What intrigues me, I was just looking at the OECD statistics on obesity. And, the fact of the matter is, we can look shy about it, but in the US, it's getting close to 40% of adults are badly overweight. In the UK, it's 30. In Italy, it's 12. And I'm thinking,
That's fascinating.
it's a lot to do here with food. They treat food correctly. It has an important place in their life, way more than just the nutrition and filling their tummies. But it's intriguing, of course, Jolly, because if you look within the US, and we're behind you in terms of anti-obesity medication use, but I wonder in the US if will we be approaching, what can we call it, peak paunch, let's say. But it sort of slightly worries me if we just rely on drugs to get us over the problem. I think that just sort of misses the point, that I think we have to stand back and say, no, are we treating food as we should treat it? Can we learn something from the Italians? And I would suggest we can learn a lot from them.
That's a great point, David, particularly as we continue to battle loneliness and isolation in the United States and the epidemic of loneliness.
Mm.
The role that food and food culture could play in that is significant, and there continues to be great debate about the value of GLP-1s and the medification of society in terms of a way to manage obesity. But the flip side of that coin is we now pay more for diet-related healthcare than we do for tobacco-related healthcare, significantly more.
Right.
And
Wow.
so it just becomes such a complex conversation, as you noted, but food culture continues to be an important conversation that's worth having. If you have additional questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat or the Q&A. We are out of time for today, but we're going to be here every month in 2025, and we have no idea where we're going to catch David on any given month. So please join us again next time for the fastest 15 minutes in food on February 6th. We will see you then with David Hughes, Dr. Food. Have a great rest of your day or evening, and David, safe travels to Portugal.
Thanks very much, Charlie, and Happy New Year to you all.
Take care. Bye-bye.